everyone, welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to my top 10 video for summer films of 2023. It's been a few weeks since the summer has ended, but of course, I needed to catch up on a few stragglers that I didn't get to see in the main summer season, and just kind of sort through. It has been a very packed summer in very interesting ways. Some films that were surprise hits that I didn't expect to be as surprising in terms of enjoyment, but also the opposite. Films that I was really hyped for, or that I heard a lot of hype about that I didn't love as much. And rather than going through every single film honorable mention wise, because there are several honorable mentions, this was a very jam-packed summer, good and bad, I figured why not make it a podcast exclusive and give you my entire top 26. That's right, I saw 26 films this summer. So my entire top 26, if you want to hear all my thoughts on all the films I saw this summer, you can check that out at the Dyl Pickle Podcast. But here on this video, I will just be talking about my top 10 because I always want to leave you guys with a little something to look forward to elsewhere, you know, kind of a little shameless promotion for the podcast. But this really was, like I was saying, a very jam-packed summer. But looking at my top 10, it's not necessarily the top 10 I expected going into the summer, and definitely not in the right order. I mean, if you were to show me these 10 films and tell me that this was going to be my top 10, I might have said, okay, that makes a little bit of sense, but I would have never thought of them in this order. So I'm very excited to talk about some movies. All 10 of these I definitely recommend. Some of them you've definitely heard of, definitely seen. I'm wearing pink for a reason. Just a fair warning, I am also not including any of the Sundance films that I saw at Sundance, films like Theater Camp, like Run Rabbit Run, because I look at those more as January films, because that's when I saw them at Sundance in January. There are some Sundance films, however, that I didn't see until the summer, so I will be including those in these rankings. Before I get into my ranking, I just wanted to bring awareness to, of course, the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA strikes. These are strikes that are currently going on right now to help raise awareness for actors and writers' wages. The tiring, countless, amazing things they do is worth acknowledgement. So I wanted to share down below in the description all the ways you can help out those guilds and show support and just bring awareness to the strikes. And I will say, while these are top 10 films, I do love all these films. This is not necessarily me promoting these films. I'm not paid by any of these studios to promote any of these films. Think of this as film discussion more than film promotion. This is a criticism channel. Yes, there are movies I want you to see, but it's not necessarily because I'm paid by the studios to do so. I ultimately, like the writers and the actors, want to get fair wages for all. So I'm hoping you all can see my call of action, go to the description below and help out those guilds, or at least read up on them and how you can support, even not monetarily. And now let's get into our top 10. Like I said, there's a lot of honorable mentions. You can listen to the podcast and find out what those are. But starting at number 10, we're going to kick it off with a bang. We're going to start with Joyride. Now, I did a full review on Joyride, so I'm not going to go too in-depth, but this film deals a lot about friendship and camaraderie, but it also deals with self and culture and the way we connect to the cultures that we may have grown up with or been absent from growing up, especially when it comes to adoption and the ideas of someone trying to connect with a past they had never explored before.
It's a big deal going to your birth country.
We used to talk about it all the time when we were little, remember? Grand adventure to find your birth mother.
I think Joyride is a film in a long list of films, like, for example, No Hard Feelings, or even like Strays, these comedies that have much deeper meanings to them than just the surface level comedy. Now, obviously, No Hard Feelings and Strays really go for some of the shock, crazy comedy factor, and Joyride does too, but I think Joyride's sentimental moments are even stronger than the other two films I mentioned. I think the heart in this film is so abundant, so infectious, so explosive. It's one of those films that you have a joy watching for the comedy and the raunchiness and the dirtiness and the nudity and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, you kind of leave thinking about the heart of it all. And, you know, I'm going to go recommend Joyride to people, not because I think it's a romp that everyone needs to see because this part's hilarious or that part's hilarious, but because I genuinely think it has a great message to share. And I think those are some of the best comedies, especially with a studio comedy. I mean, you're utilizing all these actors to their peak ability comedically, but also having something very meaningful to say about self and exploration of culture and connection to culture and the way we kind of relate to one another because of our culture and what that means to us in our friendships and our everyday relationships, our familial relationships. I think it's a really nuanced film, a much more nuanced film than one would expect. So I highly recommend Joyride.
Get the Coke bags out? Yeah, but only 7, and I think I put in 8.
Just push, pull, twist it.
It's not a puppet, it's my asshole!
At number 9 is a streaming film that I didn't even remember coming out this summer, but it did. It is a Sundance film, but I didn't see it at Sundance. As I said earlier, I'm not including Sundance films that I saw at Sundance in these rankings, but still is a film I did not see at Sundance, but I did finally get around to it at Apple TV Plus. Still a Michael J. Fox story. It's really an emotional watch because I grew up with Michael J. Fox's movies, not just with Back to the Future, but of course with Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and Stuart Little. Michael J. Fox has been a part of my childhood and my adolescence into adulthood as well. And to see him and the struggles he faces on a daily basis, it is heartbreaking to see. But the thing I like best about the film is that you get to hear everything from his voice. So it is his own perspective on his life.
What did it mean to be still?
I wouldn't know. I was ever still.
And, I feel like sometimes when you put someone's life story into another director's hands or another person's hands, biographically versus autobiographically, I think sometimes this truth can be kind of misconstrued a little bit, or maybe the subject matter isn't as honest and open as it could be, but because you have Michael J. Fox actually narrating this thing, actually giving his own personal confessionals to the camera, you're able to feel that sense of rawness and, vulnerability on display, and it makes for a much more meaningful ride the whole way through. And I found it incredibly moving, but also very optimistic, because this film does not just dwell on the negative, but kind of focuses on a few of the more optimistic aspects as well, and the fact that he is able to still have this amazing family that cares for him. I mean, the story with him and his wife, that they met on the set of the show that he was on, and then, kind of fell in love and grew this beautiful family together, and she's still stuck by his side through every doctor's appointment.
I told Tracy the news. In sickness and in health, I remember her whispering. No one outside of my family knew.
Things like that are just inspiring as someone who wants to have a family someday and grow a family and have these kind of bonds and connections with other people, to see that he is able to still live his life, and he's not going to let this one thing define him. And even if others define him this certain way, he does not define himself that way. And I think that's really inspirational to see. So while it is a downer at times, I think it does have some really uplifting messages as well. And I think it's just a very well structured documentary. They use clips from Michael J. Fox's television and movies to kind of act as their own little commentaries on what's going on. It's almost like you're telling the story of his life through glimpses of his projects themselves. I think it's a genius way of storytelling. I think this is one of the best edited documentaries I've ever seen in my life. So for that reason, it's a number 9.
The sad sack story is Michael J. Fox gets this debilitating disease and it crushes him.
Yeah, that's boring.
At number 8, we have another Sundance film that I didn't get around to until the summer. This one might be a little bit higher on other people's list, but I'll tell you why it's a little lower on mine. But it is still in my top 10. It is Past Lives. Past Lives follows a character named Nora, played by Greta Lee, who is amazing in this movie. We see when she's a young girl that she emigrates from South Korea, and as she grows older, she starts to kind of distance herself from her Korean culture, but at the same time, when she's older, she kind of reflects back on this childhood bond she had with one of her friends when she was younger, and through that, she decides to kind of seek out this friendship and reconnect with this person from her past. And it's a really interesting story because going into this, I thought it would be a love story and a love triangle, and there is an element of it, obviously, the fact that she has moved on and found her own love here in North America, but then she also has this bond with this childhood friend, potentially love interest from South Korea as well, and you start to see this a bit of a love triangle exploration, but it's more than a love triangle. It's more so about this woman and her own kind of connection to her culture. It actually makes for a really great double feature with Joyride, and you're able to see through these relationships with both her new partner and her childhood friend, you kind of get these ideas and these conversations about fate and what it means to be someone's soulmate and what a soulmate means. Is a soulmate a solely romantic concept, or is it something that can be friendship based? And we see all the ins and outs and explorations of it. The reason I really like Past Lives is because it doesn't take any conventions in being a love triangle. It doesn't ever kind of toy with your emotions to where you're wondering, who's she going to choose? Who's she going to choose? I think the film is very clear cut in the direction it's going, but it's how it gets to that destination that is very beautiful to watch. And it brings up some conversations that you may not get in a lot of love triangle films, because love triangles are so based on putting two people people against each other. But in this film, it doesn't really pin two guys against each other, but more so just kind of seeing things through this woman's eyes and seeing how she views each of the relationships in her life and kind of just coming to her own self conclusions. The reason I don't have it higher on the list is only because honestly, this was a stacked summer, and so many films that have come out since have just kind of grasped my attention more. I think Past Lives is a film that I needed to sit with to fully appreciate, and I still probably need another viewing or two to fully immerse myself in, because while it is an unconventional love story, I still think in terms of style, I think I've seen films like it in terms of the way it's presented, the dialogue style. It feels a little Linklater light, like kind of a diet version of Linklater, who I am a huge fan of. He's my favorite screenwriter of all time. The Before trilogy, one of my favorite trilogies, if not my favorite trilogy of all time. So I get a little bit of glimpses of that. It honestly feels like all the Before movies kind of squashed into one. We're seeing these characters at like 3 different phases in their lives, and we're kind of diving deep into them. But because they're not 3 films, we don't get to dive even deeper. So that's probably why I kind of kept making the comparisons in my mind to something like a Before trilogy. But I know that's not fair, because this film should be judged on its own merits, and it's a very, very good film.
Wow. Wow.
At number 7, this also might be too low for some people, but it is the biggest film of the summer. It is Barbie. Now, listen, I love Barbie. I think Barbie is excellent. I think it's really, really well done. I think the script is perfect. I think it's got some amazing performances, some great visuals, some eye-catching, eye-candy like visuals that I can't get enough of. And those are all the reasons why Barbie is on my top 10 and why I think it's been such a successful film this summer. Its feminist message is one that is not subtle, but it doesn't have to be, it doesn't need to be. And I think the film is stronger because of it. And I think the lack of subtlety is what really has been sticking with viewers, because you've got viewers of all ages. It's a film that's skewed toward adults, but I think it should still be enjoyed and be able to be enjoyed by younger viewers too. And I think younger viewers, even though the dialogue is a little bit more mature in just the language they're using, I still think the overall messages and theming is something that all ages can relate to, especially for women. And the film really dives into the women feminist perspective living in America as a woman.
What's going on? Why are these men looking at me?
Yeah, they're also staring at me.
But also through Ken's character, there's a lot of great commentary for the male gaze as well. But of course, it is told from a female's perspective, so you get just an even bigger, rounded kind of take on the whole subject matter, which I think is really, really brilliant. And I think it's why so many people are drawn to it, because it has that mass appeal despite kind of feeling like it's more for adults. I think any age could get something out of it. Maybe not the same thing out of it, but it definitely can. And I think the comedy here is really smart as well.
Do you guys ever think about dying?
The only reason I have it lower is, again, this is a stacked summer. There are other films that I feel like just stuck with me more. But also, there's that corporate angle of, yes, the film is making fun of Mattel and kind of criticizing Mattel, but I don't think it sinks its teeth in enough. I think it's a little laissez-faire when it comes to that issue. And at the end of the day, this is still essentially a toy commercial at the end of the day. We're kind of talking about films like Air in a similar wavelength where, you have a film about a product. Ultimately, it's still trying to make the product look good in a certain light. Now, Barbie, because of Greta Gerwig, is still able to criticize the product and have a very nuanced take on it. And I think if anyone else but Greta Gerwig directed it, I don't think we would get that. I think it would be a lot more of that corporate commercial-esque kind of filmmaking, something like a Transformers, for example, where it's solely there to sell the toy. Here, I think there's a lot more nuance because of who's behind the pen and behind the camera. That being said, when there's Barbie outfits being flown into the air and there's a freeze frame of an outfit and it says, this is the outfit from this Barbie, like that to me is a little too obvious that they're trying to sell a product at the end of the day. So if you remove all the corporate dirtiness from my brain, then I think this is a near perfect movie. But that's one little inkling is just kind of creeping in the back of my brain, especially in the midst of writer strikes and actor strikes, and kind of seeing all these studios kind of in the spotlight and seeing them for what they really are at times. I think Barbie does toe the line a bit in that negative direction, but again, it's so special. It's such an amazing film. There's a reason a lot of people are going to put it at number 1, and it is still in my top 10, so please don't hate me for that.
Ideas live forever.
Number 6 is part 1 of a two-parter. We haven't gotten the second part yet, but the first part is freaking awesome. It's Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Now, this was my most anticipated movie of the year, and it definitely delivered. I think it delivered on all the thrills, all the high-octane stunts. I think one of the detriments to this film is that because the big stunt was kind of commercialized and put in every single advertisement, there's a little bit of luster lacked, but it doesn't really matter because there's still going to be 3 or 4 other big stunts that equally match it. Some entertaining set pieces. I actually think my favorite set piece upon rewatch is the one where they're in the airport and they're trying to dodge, all these different people coming at them all at once and having to change their identities. And then Benji's trying to fix a bomb that's in the baggage claim area. Like, I think that set piece is actually my favorite. I think there's also one big character death that bothered me a lot, but all of those qualms aside, this is still one of the most consistent franchises. I think except for the second film, this franchise has been almost perfect. I think it really has delivered to what the expectations were set for them. And I think they tell really good, coherent stories, complex stories, but also stories that aren't overly complex to where you're distracted with the plot and you can still focus on these really dazzling visual moments. And also, this is a film that was very heavily burdened by COVID and delays, so much so to where it lost a lot of money because the budget was so big because they had to pay for all these crew and cast because of the COVID break. I'll give them this. Because of all the COVID restrictions, it actually looks really good. I think because you can't go so grand at certain points, they almost take a tip out of the old Brian De Palma hat, the director who did the first film, and they focus a lot on these really intense close-ups, these Dutch angles, these really interesting ways of framing these scenes that we haven't really seen in a little while. I think a lot of the recent Mission Impossible movies have been so big that this movie feels like it kind of tightens it back in on like the facial expressions and the intense talking face-to-face moments. And I think that's what makes this so special. Now, obviously those bigger moments are also incredible, but I think the smaller moments are even more striking to me as a viewer. I think this is a really solid entry in the franchise. Is it my favorite? Not at all, but I think it's definitely got the juice that this franchise has always had, and it's always a thrill to see, no matter the circumstance. At number 5, we have a horror film. Ooh, the only straight up horror film. There's other films that have horror tints to them, but this was hands down the horror film of the summer. It is Talk to Me. It is kind of essentially a metaphor for drugs, right? There's this hand, this magical hand that people can touch and they can talk to the dead and they get possessed for 2 minutes. They get this high and then they snap out of it.
Talk to me.
Similar to a drug high, right? Oh, here's your friend. Here's this drug. Try it. After 2 minutes, you'll trip out. You'll have the best high of your life, and then you'll snap out of it. Everything will be okay. But because it's a drug metaphor, it also has to show the darkness of peer pressure and what happens when maybe the wrong person is introduced to this tantalizing drug, or what happens when someone who is young is pressured by older people to take part in this ritual. And I think it has some pretty dark consequences. And I honestly, at first, I was watching it, I was like, this metaphor is way too blatant. But I also think, for being such a blatant metaphor, this film really swings big, and I do appreciate that. I think the visuals are really, really bold. I think for a first film, these directors really just sunk into it and gave us the most they could give. And I think the end, it kind of teeters on going off the rails a little bit more, but I think because it's so successful up to a point, I was able to forgive the sloppy ending because I think it was just so daring throughout. I think some of the performances are excellent.
Please, it's my mom's Remembrance Day. I just want to forget about it.
These are all actors, aside from Miranda Otto, that I was unfamiliar with before. These are all Australian actors, and I think they are all giving such great performances, especially Sophie Wilde and Joe Bird. Joe Bird having one of the most scary possession sequences ever. I mean, he is giving, Millie Shapiro level Hereditary performance here. Reagan, Linda Blair, Exorcist. Like, he doesn't quite go that deep into the scariness. Like, he's not scary himself, but the way he is possessed by the scary thing is just so, it's so haunting. I mean, this film just really scared the crap out of me. And I think, honestly, for a horror film, if you're going to be a really blatant metaphor for something, then don't shy away from it. And this film doesn't really do that. Instead, it just tries to show what it has because of this metaphor with its other elements, with its characters, with the character relationships, with the horror, with the scares. This is the scariest movie I've seen since Skinamarink. And I was going to say the scariest movie I've seen in years since Hereditary, but that would not be true. Skinamarink did come out this year, but I think it's one of the scariest movies I've seen since Hereditary. And obviously it's not Hereditary. It hasn't quite lived up to that hype, but I think this is a really good alternate if you want to pair something with Hereditary and kind of look at something similarly, a film about something that is very clearly a blatant metaphor for something, but also has these great, amazing character moments and has this really eerie vibe to it. I think Talk to Me is a great film, and I would go deeper into explaining why I love it, but it's something you have to see with your own eyes.
They like you.
At number 4, hard to believe this is a summer movie because it came out so long ago, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I did a whole podcast on this on Marvelous Movie Mondays, breaking it down with spoilers, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. The first time I saw it, I was a little worried because I thought the tonal shifts were a little weird. We're going from this really heartbreaking story about animal cruelty to Drax punching a guy off a motorcycle.
Come on, Drax. Seriously, dude?
But I think the more I've watched it, the more I realize that's just James Gunn's thing. He goes big in either polar opposite, but somehow it all comes together in a really cohesive whole to where of all these movies, I cried way more at Guardians 3 than I did any other film on this list. And I think that's a big testament to how successful of a film this is. I think it's dazzling to look at. The fact that all these characters are mostly prosthetic makeup and not CGI, I think adds a great timeless quality to the film. I think the practical sets opposed to the green screen adds a real timeless feel to the film. Maybe these studios should just trust that the talented people they hire have talent and let them do their thing. If you want to give thousands and thousands of prosthetics, do it. These makeup designers are very well capable. And I think this is a good example of showing that you don't necessarily need to take all the shortcuts in making a movie. If you give enough time to really craft every element to the best and most fine-tuned ability, I think it can create a really spectacular whole.
Pete, I'm done running.
At number 3, we have Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, another film that was a very highly anticipated superhero flick that absolutely delivered. Now, I know it's a part 1, so there's a cliffhanger, and I'll be honest, I think Dead Reckoning Part 1 had a more successful ending than this Part 1 did, but I mean, who wasn't amped after that ending? Who wasn't leaving the theater being like, whoa, what just happened? Like, that was literally me watching this film. I loved it so much. I saw it again on a movie shoot. Like, I was literally shooting a movie in June, and we had one off day, and me and all the other guys on set went, you know what? We're going to go see Spider-Verse. Why? Why not? Because it's amazing. That's why. And I really think it's just one of those perfectly crafted films as well. Just like I was talking about with Guardians 3, all those artists really showed how passionate they were for the art they were creating. Every single detail of this thing is so evident and so appreciated. I just love seeing every nook and cranny of this art style. And while I don't think it's a perfect movie, I don't think many movies are, I think this is as perfect a sequel to the first film that this could have ever been. I think the voice cast is amazing. Obviously, Shamik Moore is incredible as Miles Morales, but I think Haley Steinfeld really steals the show as Gwen Stacy here. And I love the trans allegory at play here. The idea that Gwen's father himself has a trans pin that he wears on his cap. But also the use of bylighting to kind of show this kind of transgender parallel story. The idea that this is essentially a character who wants to live her life out and proud, but has to conceal it because she's worried about what her father's going to think. Again, like Talk to Me, there's a blatant metaphor going on here, but I think for especially a kid's movie like this, for a movie that's kind of geared towards younger audiences, I think it's okay to be a little bit blatant about your metaphors and about your subject matter, because this is something that I think a lot of kids who are dealing with their own identity and trying to come to terms with what that is for themselves, I think they're going to get a lot out of this movie, seeing these characters as these characters who are really trying to embrace all they are and their uniquenesses and not let who their parents are or who their societies and surroundings are, let them define who they are or let them prevent themselves from defining who they are themselves. And I think this is a really strong film for that reason, not just because of the trans allegory, but because the action's great, the humor's great, the acting's great. It's a great film all around.
We are supposed to be the good guys.
We are.
At number 2, we have Bottom. Speaking of queer-themed films, this film is one of the gayest films I've ever seen in my life. Boy, does every single joke land perfectly. I mean, this almost feels like a fictionalized universe, you know, the colors, the way everything's stylized, the humor, the way the characters are acting with one another, the whole idea of you're not a loser because you're gay. Some of the cool kids at school are gay. You're losers because you're gay and untalented. Like, I think that's one of the greatest jokes because it sets up from the beginning that this isn't going to be one of those stereotypical movies about queerness where it's these characters trying to overcome the fact that they're gay in this overall, you know, kind of straight homophobic society. No, it's not trying to be that film. Instead, it embraces the sexuality elements of the film and instead focuses on being this really fun romp about teenagers who are trying to hook up with friends and doing crazy means to do that.
So we teach a bunch of girls how to defend themselves. They are grateful to us. Adrenaline is flowing. Next thing you know, Isabel and Brittany are kissing us on the mouth.
But I think that's what Bottoms really does well, is it leans into the awkward uncomfortability of adolescence and coming of age, but also finds the most fun, hilarious circumstances to put these characters in. And again, like Joyride, like No Hard Feelings, like Strays, I think there's some actual meaningful emotional subtext below the surface. I think for every joke, there's an amazing payoff, but there's also a little bit of heart there. And I think the central friendship is really meaningful, as well as the relationships, the romantic relationships built, as well as the relationships to women and their gender. And like Barbie, this is a really great feminist piece as well. I'd go as far as to say this may be even better than Barbie in terms of its feminist messaging. There's just some sort of energy this film gives off that is just so infectious that, like Barbie, doesn't necessarily criticize men, but definitely empowers women. And I think it really shows that we can have strong women storytellers in film telling these stories about strong women. Ayo Edebiri is having the best summer ever, between TMNT, between The Bear, between Theater Camp, which I'm not putting on this list because I saw it at Sundance. But again, she is having one of the best summers I could ever think of for any star ever. And she is a highlight in this one as well. She's not just like a good player in each of these films. She is usually the highlight of all of these films. But Rachel Sennott as well. She was a standout in Shiva Baby. She came back to star in this one and to co-write it with Emma Seligman. I mean, Emma Seligman and Greta Gerwig are probably two of my favorite working women directors right now, as well as Kelly Freeman Craig, who directed my favorite film of last spring, which was Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. I think these women are just telling some of the most amazing feminist stories right now in cinema. And I think it's about time, especially with Anatomy for a Fall coming up, especially with Saltburn coming out. I mean, this is a chance where we could have a majority of the best director nominees be women. Do I think that's actually going to happen at the Oscars? Probably not, but it's wishful thinking. And with the plethora of amazing women-directed films this year, Past Lives too. Past Lives, another great women-directed film. Joyride, I mean, these films are so good, and I love all the feminist messaging in them, because feminism is not defined by gender. Anyone could be a feminist, and it reminds me why I am a feminist and why I want to fight for women's rights all the time and just boost up and support these amazing women. But yes, this film is one of the funniest films ever. Marshawn Lynch is so good, genuinely giving one of the best performances of the year in a supporting role. I think he is just utterly hilarious.
You know how to work that thing. I know you ain't tickling the pearl.
I just don't know if you're supposed to be talking to us like that, just like as a teacher.
This is a film that needs to be seen by everyone. I don't care what age. Actually, no, I shouldn't say that, because young people probably shouldn't see this. But like I'm saying, teenager to college to adult to grandparent, I don't care. This movie is amazing. Go see it.
We're just practicing for a self-defense club.
So it's like a fight club?
Yes.
Just stay in your lane until you're munching beaver at Wesleyan.
Yes, sir.
Oppenheimer's number one. That was not a surprise. If you saw my Oppenheimer review, you knew this was coming. I think this is not just the best film of the summer, obviously, because it's number one on this list, but I think it's the best film Nolan has ever directed. And that is a big statement coming from someone who got into movies because of The Dark Knight. Like, I was always into movies. I always liked movies, but Dark Knight was the film that made me look at movies in a deeper lens than, it's a movie. I looked at it like it was a work of art. That is how powerful Nolan's Dark Knight was on me. And I'm still willing to say that Oppenheimer's a better movie, because I think Oppenheimer is just the grand magnum opus of everything, or opus, of everything he's been trying to do with his whole career, you know, telling these nonlinear storylines, you know, playing with the idea of time and how time and stories are told incoherently versus coherently, when certain information is given versus when certain information is held to be revealed later. Stuff we saw with The Prestige, with Memento. He does it really well here, but also delivering on the spectacle that we get from something like The Dark Knight or his other Batman movies, or even Tenet or Interstellar or Inception. But also, I think more than any other film except for maybe Interstellar, this also feels like his most emotional. There are some real emotional stakes for these characters. You feel every amount of bitterness that Robert Downey Jr. is trying to convey. You feel every moment of uncertainty that Cillian Murphy portrays. You feel every moment of tears and pain that Florence Pugh feels. You feel every sense of strength that Emily Blunt feels. You feel that kind of arrogance that Matt Damon feels.
Chances are near zero. Near zero. What do you want from theory alone? Zero would be nice.
This is a film that doesn't just present us a plot or amazing visuals or an amazing story, but amazing character moments, which is something that I feel like a lot of people have criticized Nolan for so many years. Is, well, he tells great stories, but his characters are kind of one note. He doesn't know how to write women characters well. And yes, this is a very male-dominated film, and I just talked about these amazing feminist films coming before it, like Barbie and like Bottoms, but I do think the women in this film get a lot of amazing moments. You know, Florence Pugh, in her minimal screen time, makes a huge impact on the film. I think Emily Blunt, especially in her final scene in Act 3, has one of the most amazing moments of any woman character in Nolan's career. And everything that I kind of dismissed as, it isn't just this, it isn't just that, in terms of its spectacle, I mean, I have to talk about the spectacle because the spectacle is outstanding. I think his whole visual effects department, his whole special effects department was like 10 people, and they are responsible for creating these amazing explosions. I mean, this also reminded me of what I talked about with Guardians 3, how Guardians 3, it relies so much on practical effects. Oppenheimer as well deals with practical effects and proves that you do not need CGI. You do not need this modern technology to tell a movie the way it deserves to be told. And I think this is a great example of it. He's able to tell this story with obviously new technology because he had to literally create black and white IMAX cameras for this, but you know what I mean? He had to kind of just stick to the old school way of actually making these things happen rather than trying to recreate them inorganically. And I really appreciate that about him as a filmmaker. I think the film, for being 3 hours, it does feel the length, but it feels the length in a satisfying way to where you leave feeling like you've eaten the fullest, most delicious meal possible. It's like after a Thanksgiving dinner. You know you ate a lot of food, but you're not mad about it at all, and you're ready to take a nap and wake up the next day and tell everyone about how great it tasted.
Detonator charged.
And that is Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer tastes great. That sounded weird, but that is my number one. I'm sure I could go deeper into this conversation, but of course, I did a review for Oppenheimer and Barbie and Guardians and Spider-Man and Mission Impossible and Joyride. So all those movies have full reviews, so you can go check those out, as well as the Dyl Pickle Podcast, where I will be talking about my 11 through 26 on this list, with maybe some briefer thoughts than these more elongated top 10 thoughts. But I really want to know what you thought were the top 10 movies of your summer 2023. Are there some films I missed that I didn't get around to? I obviously didn't review Haunted Mansion. I missed that. I missed They Clone Tyrone and Nimona, two Netflix films that I really, really wanted to see. Insidious, The Red Door, I was just too scared to see it, in all honesty. The Machine, The Boogeyman, Flamin' Hot, all these movies I wanted to get around to, haven't gotten around to, but will hopefully get around to by the end of the year. But please let me know what your top 10 are down below. And thank you so much to these fellow subscribers for their help in donating as part of the subathon back in February. Their donations are definitely acknowledged and well appreciated. So thank you all so much for watching. We're in the midst of Oscar season now. It's on full swing. I will be back very, very soon to give you my post-festival Oscar predictions, because just in the past week, there have been a lot of films on the rise because of the festival. So thank you so much for watching. And as always, check out the Dyl Pickle Podcast. Check out the Dyl Pickle Movie Network TikTok page. And I will see you next time. Thank you, guys.